Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Speech and Language Kids podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about what to do if you are working with a child who is struggling in more than one area of language. So, if you've been watching our previous episodes for the last several weeks, we've been talking about how to follow the framework, the SLK framework, to guide you toward which skill to work on. But that gets more complicated when the child is struggling in multiple areas. So, we are going to go through today and we are going to talk about this idea of a cycles approach to language therapy. So, if you are new to me, welcome. I'm Carrie Clark, speech language pathologist, and I run the Speech and Language Kids website along with the Speech and Language Kids Hub, which is our membership community that holds our SLK framework and all of our materials, as well as our discussion board, which is where I am live right now. Welcome, Tiffany. All right, those of you who are with me live, you can chat in and ask questions as we go along. And if you would like to listen to a live recording of our podcast in the future, you can head on over to hub.speechandlanguagekids.com. All right. Okay, so I want to tell you where this idea of this cycles approach for language came from for me personally. And this was two little friends that I had at a rural school district that I was going to, where it was about an hour away. And so me and one other therapist would go out there once a week and we would see all the kids in the entire school district in one day. And then we'd come back because it was a small school district. So there weren't a lot of kids that needed those special services. But we had two in particular that I was working with that got my gears working in this idea of cycles approach for language. So if you're familiar with the cycles approach for phonology, that's where a child is struggling with a lot of different areas of phonology, meaning that they have a lot of phonological processes or sound errors. And so what the cycles approach does is it takes each phonological process that they need to work on and works on it for a set amount of time before you cycle to the next one. And this is a very well established method of treating speech sound disorders, in particular phonological disorders. And we actually have a whole bunch of resources inside the hub and on the Speech and Language Kids site on that cycles approach for phonology. But there's not as much talked about this approach when it comes to language therapy or even other speech sound disorders like articulation. And so this was what I wanted to start looking into. And here's why. So I had two friends at this rural school district. Let's call the first one Lane. So Lane was in third grade, and honestly, Lane's language skills were not that bad. She was on my caseload. She was already on the caseload when I came to the district. And she had a couple of language goals for specific skills, but she was doing great with those. And so it came time to do her IEP, and I struggled to figure out what to write goals for because, yes, she still needed some help, but there wasn't one thing where I could say, oh man, her vocab skills, that if we could, that's the thing that she's struggling with, or, oh, it's just syntax, right? It was, she had a couple of pronoun problems, but her other syntax was good. She had a couple of vocab problems, but most of her vocab was good. And so she had a lot of different areas where she was slightly delayed, but not enough that I could say, yes, this is what we need to write the goal for, okay? And so that one started me thinking of, okay, is there a way that instead of saying, I'm going to hit this one language skill for 6 weeks, very just directly and very in depth, and we're going to hit it until she's got it, could I instead make more progress with her by giving her a little reminder of this skill, a little reminder of this skill, a boost of that skill, explicitly teach that one, and cycle through like we do with the phonology approach, all right? Hey Marie, welcome. All right, if you guys have any questions, put those in the chat. Okay, so then the other one, I'm going to call him Parker. Parker was a kindergartner. And by the time I saw Parker, he had already been in kindergarten for, let's say, about half a school year. I think this was right after winter break. And the teacher came to me and said, Parker is really struggling, and I'm not sure what to do. And so, they had tried all of the normal, help him in the classroom, all of the strategies that work for most kids, and they weren't quite working. And so we tested Parker in every area. And he did not qualify in a single one, except for mine, by 1 point. So the way this district was, or our state, I guess, you have to have a certain score on one of two different language tests. One of your scores has to be below a certain cutoff. Oh, it's trying to switch my microphone. Dang it. This darn microphone, I thought I had it figured out. All right, it looks like it's still recording. Can you guys still hear me okay in the chat? Let me know if you're having trouble with sound. So anyway, Parker qualified by 1 point. One of his scores was just barely low enough that he qualified for me. And so I was struggling with figuring out, again, what to write for him, because the reason he only barely qualified for me and didn't qualify for anything else is because he didn't have any of these like huge gaps where we were realizing that he was missing big chunks of information, or his learning was off in this one area. It was just that he was a little bit delayed in all of these areas. And he was another one that I thought, man, instead of writing one goal for answering where questions, I really wanted to work just a little bit on all of these skills and boost him up. And so if any of you have been a part of an RTI school or program, which is response to intervention, or sometimes it's called a multi-tiered system of supports, these are often our kids who we see in that tier 2, where the regular classroom stuff isn't quite enough, but they don't necessarily need the full special education or the full special services, okay? All right, I'm gonna pause. Okay, hopefully that's gonna work. You guys let me know if it cuts out again. All right, so we definitely see this with our tier 2 kids, right? The kids that need a little bit of extra support, but we also sometimes see this with our more severe kids that have language disorders, but they're struggling in a lot of different language areas. Vocab is struggling, answering and asking questions is struggling, being able to sequence and retell past events, syntax, grammar, all of those areas are impacted. And just working on one isn't going to give them much of a boost in therapy as if we were to be able to work on all of them, right? And so this is where I started to think about this idea of a cycles approach and what that might look like for language. And I actually was able to find a research study, and I don't remember who it was off the top of my head. It was back from the 80s or 90s maybe. But what they did was they did a cycles approach where they were switching between phonology and language. Okay, so not quite what I'm talking about here, but it was a similar concept. And they had 3 different groups. So one group was in each session, they targeted both phonology and then language. I think it was grammar. And then for the second group, they did block scheduling. So they just targeted phonology for 6 weeks, and then they just targeted language. And then another one was cycles. So 1 week for each. So a week of phonology, a week of language, a week of phonology, and a week of language. And what they found was that back and forth cycling was more effective than either of the other two. And I thought that was fascinating because I really do think that this makes sense, okay? What we're seeing is that by cycling through different language targets, we're teaching in a way that, number one, more closely mirrors natural language development, where a child is not just learning one skill at a time, right? They're learning a lot of them, but they might hear this one this day, and then they're working on this one the next day. And so they're kind of all over the place, right? And so that's how we learn language naturally. So being able to flip back and forth in our therapy, where we target this one this day and this one another day, that also reflects that. Number two, it also reflects the cyclical curriculum style that our public education system, at least in the United States, teaches, right? You don't just learn about plants 1 year in science and then we never talk about plants again, right? It comes up every year in a slightly more advanced way each year, and we learn more and more about plants as we go along. I remember when my son was in first grade and he had virtual school because that was during the pandemic. And so I was doing all the lessons with him. And I remember the plant one came up, and it was the standard that they had to meet was they just had to know that plants needed dirt, water, and sunlight. And that was it. That, like, so basic, right? And I remember just being like, wow, that's all we're doing. But that's because next year we're going to get a little more in depth on plants, and then a little bit more the following year. And so our education system is already teaching this way. We don't just work on plural nouns once and be done. We work on it every year as it comes up in more and more complex situations. So by teaching in a cyclical manner like this, we're able to align our teaching to the curriculum, to natural language development, and it just makes sense. Okay? So let's talk briefly about how to do this. How does this look in practice? And those of you who are in here with me live, if you have questions as we're going along, go ahead and type those in the chat, or if you have questions about this process in general, any of that, put that in there. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways that you could use this approach for language, right? If you're doing the Cycles Approach for Phonology by Barbara Hodson, it is a very prescribed program. You do it exactly like this. Here are the steps, and it's all laid out for you. And I have resources for that inside the hub if that's what you're looking for. But the language, there's not, no one person has sat down and said, this is the best way to cycle through language targets. But a lot of programs are doing this. A lot of people are doing this. They just might not be calling it that, right? And so the big picture here is make this look however it needs to look for you. If you are working with a child with language delays, you are able to say, okay, this week we're going to work on this language skill. Next week we're going to work on that language skill. Then we're going to work on this one, and then we're going to cycle back around and we're going to pop through those. And there's no set time. I think, the phonology cycles approach is usually 1 to 2 weeks per target before you move on. But there's no right or wrong there either. You can choose how long your cycles are. And there's no best practice in terms of how many sets that you cycle through before you go back to the beginning. For the phonology one, there is a set of primary targets, which are the things that she thinks you should target first before moving on to harder phonological skills. And so think about that with language, right? Think about, okay, what are those foundational language skills that probably need to be hit first before you're going to be ready to work on some of the harder ones? And maybe some of those are the ones you put into your first cycle, okay? But then we also want to be collecting data, really, really good data that shows if what we're doing is working. And so this is the other question I get about the cycles approach is how do you write goals? How do you collect data? How do you know if it's working? And there's a couple different ways that I usually recommend people do this. And then I'm going to explain how I do this in my core language program as well, because my core language program is a cyclical language program. But the two different ways that I suggest are either one, to write a goal on a specific skill that you want to monitor that will be kind of your indicator as to whether we're making progress. And number two, the other option would be to take an overall language score on a rubric style grading of how well do they understand? How well are they able to communicate with others? Okay. And then you can monitor that way. So if you're going to choose one skill or maybe a couple of skills, this might look like, okay, well, I'm going to take data on whether or not they can retell a past event with the details in order in a way that makes sense, okay? Because that includes a lot of different language skills, so it's a really good representative kind of sample of how they're doing. And so you might either form a rubric where you say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, how well was I able to follow their narrative or their, retelling of a past event? So that might be how you do it. Or maybe it's just as simply could they or could they not retell the past events with 3 details in order, and then it's a percentage. They did it 60% of the time I asked them to. So that's one way, is you could pick a skill like that, and then even though you're working on some other skills, you're working on some syntax and asking and answering questions, you're tracking data on this one to see if those language skills are going up. Okay, so that's one way. The other way then is coming up with a rubric style grading where you say on a scale of 1 to 5, how well does the child, are they able to use their words to communicate effectively with others in their daily life? How well are they able to understand language that is given to them in their daily life? And then maybe we're rating them on that scale or asking a classroom teacher. I also have a screening inside my core language program that just lists out all the language skills that they should have at a certain grade level. And you could just have somebody go through and say, are they not present? Are they emerging? Or are they mastered? And then you could give a scale on that. That's another way to do kind of a rubric. And that would, again, be a big picture look at all the skills. Okay? So those are a couple different ways that you can write your goals and write your, collect your data to see if it's working. But obviously you'll need to find kind of the system that works for you and that makes sense for that student. All right? But your figuring out which skills to work on, we have those screening checklists inside the hub where you could go in and just check boxes on which language skills they're missing. And then you could use that as a guide. Okay, we're going to do a week on asking and answering questions. Then we're going to do a week on sequencing and retelling. And that'll kind of give you a guide as well. So that's at hub.speechandlanguagekids if you want to access that. Okay, so then what does the therapy actually look like, right? So let's say for my cycles approach, I'm going to work on asking and answering questions, sequencing and retelling, and we're going to work on some adjectives and adverbs because their vocab is lacking. So I want to teach that class of words. Okay, so let's say those are my 3 that I've decided on. So first week, I could work on just the asking and answering questions. Maybe we're going to break down those WH questions, explain that where means place, who means person, and we're going to do some explaining and some practicing with that skill, okay? So then we do that for a week, maybe 2. And then we're going to switch and we're going to go to the next skill, which was sequencing and retelling, okay? So now I'm going to say, all right, now we're going to practice this, and we're going to talk about how to put steps in order, and we're going to practice some sequencing for some familiar activities, and then we're going to build that up to being able to talk about past activities, okay? And maybe we don't get all the way to past events right now. Maybe we're still working on sequencing, and that's okay. All of the step-by-step plans for these therapy skills and the workbooks, those are all available in the hub as well. And then let's say after that week or 2, then we move on and we're going to work on those adjectives and adverbs, and maybe we're doing that through play, and we're having some fun sensory activities and talking about how things feel and how they smell and introducing those adjectives. All right? And then after that, we would cycle back to the first one and we would keep going. And after each set, you just stop and reevaluate and you say, okay, are we still needing to work on these, or are there different skills that I want to swap out? Okay? Now, I also want to explain to you how this works in my core language program, because I did it a little more differently, because what I did was I took the entire oral language curriculum for 1 grade level, and that is from the Common Core State Standards, which is a common set of curriculum in the United States. Not every state has adopted it, but it is kind of a representative of what curriculums should include. And so what I did was I went through and took all of the oral language skills for 1 grade level and I smushed them into 16 lessons. And the reason for that is because 16 weeks is about half of a school year. And I wanted you to be able to go through and teach each and every language skill for 1 grade level in half of a school year, so that you could either then repeat that as a cycle, right, and do it again to give them really, really strongly reinforced on that, or you could get them caught up. You could go to the next one. Okay, so the way it works in my core language program, and this is a big old workbook. It's a big fat workbook with just worksheets. There's 4 worksheets for each lesson, and then 2 homework pages, 1 to go home with to parents and 1 to go to teachers. So it's 6 pages per week, and you go through a series of activities that are going to focus on 1 skill. However, each of my lessons has foundational skills built in. So every lesson works on following directions, asking and answering questions, retelling, and then producing your own something. So it's either a narrative, an informational piece, or an opinion. And we rotate through those as well. So they get multiple practices, telling narratives, providing information, and stating opinions. But those foundational skills are there in every lesson. And then we cycle through the different syntax skills or the different vocab skills or narrative skills. We have different lessons for those. But the foundational skills happen every week. And so that's another way to cycle it, is maybe some things are there every week, and then you cycle through some of the other things you're doing. All right? So the core language program, that is the 16-week oral language intervention. I have that currently for kindergarten through 5th grade. That is located inside the hub, but it is a separate purchase. So you do have to purchase that separately from the hub membership if you already have that. but that is in there as well. Okay, those of you who are with me live, what questions do you have on this idea of a language cycles approach? And are any of you already doing something like this? I know there are other programs who use a similar format. The one that comes to mind right now is is it Story Grammar? No, Story Champs. Story Champs is one, I think that's what it's called. Shoot, should have looked that up. Where they cycle through things and it's all story based. So they teach language skills and they come back around, but it's all based on stories. They have like a hierarchy of stories you tell, I think. So that's one of them. But like I said, our curriculums, this Common Core State Standards, other curriculums that schools are using are already using this type of a cyclical approach where we're giving them multiple opportunities to learn these skills and practice them in harder and harder ways each time. And so that's what I really love about this kind of a cycles approach to language. It just aligns really nicely. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. If you guys are still typing, get them in there. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Like I said, a lot of resources that we talked about today. We have the checklists inside the hub where you can look and see which areas of language they're struggling with. We actually have a guide in there on using the cycles approach to language as well, because that's one of our therapy pathways. So you can find that in the hub as well. The core language program is also in the hub, but if you want more information about the core language program, go to speechandlanguagekids.com/core, and that will give you access to that page that has all the information, and you can download a sample lesson and watch a video where I walk you through it. So that's really helpful as well. I'm trying to think if there was anything else that we talked about. I think that was probably it. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up here for now, but hopefully that was helpful for you guys to kind of have a different approach to those language skills and how we target those in therapy. And we'll see you all next week on the podcast. All right, bye for now and have a great week.